Imagine a weapon that could snatch a rider from his horse at full gallop, yet fit in a soldier's belt. A tool so versatile it could strangle, trip, or disarm an enemy in the span of a heartbeat. And yet, most people today have never even heard of it. But the world of ancient warfare holds far more than swords and spears. Hidden in the shadows of history are weapons so ingenious, so terrifyingly effective, that armies went to extraordinary lengths to master them. These weren't just tools of war, they were extensions of a warrior's body, requiring years of training to wield and split-second timing to survive. Consider this: in ancient China, there existed a weapon with a blade so sharp it could slice through armor, attached to a rope that let warriors strike from impossible distances. In feudal Japan, police officers carried chains that could subdue a samurai without spilling a single drop of blood. A feat that sounds impossible until you understand the devastating technique behind it. And in the hands of Indian warriors, a simple iron chain became a whirling death trap that could shatter skulls and snap bones with surgical precision. These weapons were steeped in mystery, carved into legend by warriors whose names have been lost to time but whose techniques still echo through martial arts today. Each one tells a story of human ingenuity pushed to its limits, of cultures that saw possibilities where others saw only rope and metal. Today, we'll uncover 9 of the most devastating hook and chain weapons ever created, each one more ingenious than the last. And the first one? It was considered so dangerous that only elite warriors were permitted to carry it. Weapon 1. The Kyo-ketsu-shoge. Picture feudal Japan, 1603. The Tokugawa shogunate has just seized power, and with it comes a problem. How do you control a nation filled with armed samurai without turning every arrest into a bloodbath? The answer came in the form of a weapon that looks almost absurd at first glance. A double-bladed knife attached to a hemp rope with an iron ring at the other end. The Kyo-ketsu-shoge. And in the hands of a trained shinobi, it was absolutely lethal. Here's what made it brilliant. The blade wasn't the primary weapon. That 12-foot rope was. A ninja could throw that iron ring around an opponent's wrist, ankle, or sword arm, then yank them off balance. The moment they stumbled, the knife would flash in, not for a killing blow, but for control. One cut to the tendon, and a samurai's sword hand became useless. But the real genius? The rope could wrap around an enemy's blade, trapping it. Imagine drawing your katana, confident in your superior swordsmanship, only to have your weapon immobilized by a length of hemp. In that frozen second of confusion, you're already dead. The Kyo-ketsu-shoge wasn't just a weapon, it was a tactical Swiss army knife. That ring at the rope's end? Climbers used it as a grappling hook, scaling castle walls in the dead of night. The rope itself could garrote, trip, or bind. And because it could be concealed easily, unlike a sword, it became the preferred tool for espionage and assassination. Training with this weapon took years. You had to master not just blade work, but rope manipulation, distance judgment, and the ability to recover and redirect after each throw. One mistake, one miscalculation in rope length, and you'd leave yourself wide open. But what if I told you this Japanese innovation wasn't even the most sophisticated chain weapon of its era? Because across the sea in China, warriors were perfecting something even more devastating. Weapon 2, the rope dart, shangbiao. The rope dart looks deceptively simple. A sharpened metal dart attached to a 12 to 16-foot rope. But in the hands of a Shaolin monk, it transformed into a weapon that could kill from any angle, at any distance, with movements so fluid they seemed to defy physics. Here's the thing that makes the rope dart terrifying: unpredictability. A sword has a fixed length. You know its reach. An arrow flies in one direction. But a rope dart? It could strike from the front, whip around to attack from behind, change direction mid-flight, and return to the wielder's hand in a continuous, deadly dance. Chinese martial artists discovered that by spinning the dart in complex patterns, they created a defensive barrier that was almost impossible to penetrate. Try to close the distance, and the spinning metal would shred your exposed skin. Try to stay back, and the wielder could extend the throw to full rope length, nearly 16 feet of lethal range. But the true mastery came in the recall. After throwing the dart, skilled practitioners could snap the rope in such a way that the dart would reverse direction instantly, striking a second target before the first even hit the ground. It was like fighting 3 opponents at once, except they were all the same person. The training was brutal. Beginners practiced with weighted balls instead of blades, because even in practice, a rope dart could gouge out an eye or crack a skull. Masters could pin a playing card to a wooden post from 15 feet away. They could snatch a coin from the air mid-throw. They could strike the same target 5 times in 2 seconds without ever breaking their spin. And here's what really separated masters from novices. They could use the environment. Wrap the rope around a tree branch and suddenly you're attacking from above. Throw the dart under an opponent's leg and yank up. They're on their ground before they even realize what happened. But as devastating as the rope dart was, it pales in comparison to what Indian warriors created with even less material. Weapon 3. The Urumi. Now, technically the Urumi is a bladed whip rather than a chain weapon, but it deserves mention here because of its absolutely insane design. Imagine taking a sword, not a flexible rope, but actual sharpened steel, and making it flexible enough to coil around your waist like a belt. That's the Urumi. And it's quite possibly the most dangerous weapon ever created, for both the wielder and the target. Here's why. The Urumi consists of 1 to 4 thin, flexible steel blades, each 4 to 5 feet long, attached to a single handle. When wielded properly, these blades whip through the air at devastating speeds, capable of slicing through flesh and bone like they're not even there. The flexibility means the blade can curve around shields, wrap around defensive blocks, and strike from seemingly impossible angles. But here's the catch, and this is crucial. If you make even the slightest mistake in your technique, that blade is just as likely to cut you as your opponent. There are documented cases of untrained warriors attempting to use the Urumi and ending up with massive lacerations across their own bodies. Some lost eyes. Some lost fingers. That's why in South India, where the Urumi originated, it was considered the last weapon a martial artist would learn, only after they'd mastered every other blade. It took years of training with wooden practice weapons before anyone was allowed to touch a real Urumi. And even then, masters wore thick cloth wrapped around their bodies during training because accidents were common. In combat, an Urumi wielder would spin continuously, creating a whirling barrier of steel that enemies couldn't penetrate. The blades moved so fast they became a blur. Try to rush in, and you'd be cut to ribbons. Try to block, and the flexible steel would simply bend around your defense and find exposed flesh. But the real tactical advantage? Multiple opponents. With traditional weapons, you can only engage one enemy at a time. With an Urumi, you could strike 3 or 4 opponents in a single spin. Historical accounts describe single Urumi masters holding off groups of 8 or more attackers, the whirling blades creating a perimeter of death that no one dared cross. Yet for all its innovation, the Urumi required open space to work effectively. But what about confined spaces? What about fighting indoors, or in crowded streets? That's where the next weapon on our list truly excelled. Weapon 4, the kusarigama. If the Kyoketsu shoge was a precision instrument, the kusarigama was a farmer's tool transformed into a weapon of absolute chaos. At its core, it's brutally simple. A kama, a traditional Japanese sickle with a curved blade, attached to a metal chain with a weight at the end. But that simplicity is deceptive, because the kusarigama offered something most weapons couldn't: complete tactical versatility at any range. Here's how it worked in combat. The weighted chain could be swung in defensive patterns to block incoming attacks, while the sickle remained ready to strike. If an enemy stayed at distance, you could throw the weight to entangle their legs or weapon. If they closed in, the sickle became a devastating close-quarters tool, its curved blade perfect for hooking behind defenses and pulling an opponent into a killing blow. But the real genius was in the psychology of fighting against it. Imagine facing a kusarigama wielder. You see the chain spinning, you watch the weight whirling in hypnotic patterns, and your attention locks on that projectile threat. Then, in the split second you're focused on not getting your legs tangled, the sickle flashes in from an entirely different angle. Historical records describe kusarigama masters who could swing the weighted chain with one hand while simultaneously wielding the sickle with the other, essentially fighting with 2 independent weapons that created a sphere of control around their body. Step into that sphere from any angle, and you were in range of at least one lethal component. The weapon's agricultural origins also meant it avoided suspicion. During periods when carrying swords was restricted, farmers and commoners could possess a kama as a tool. Add a chain, and suddenly that innocent farming implement became a weapon that could defeat a fully armed samurai. Training focused on rhythm and momentum. Once you got the chain moving, you had to maintain that motion, using its kinetic energy to transition seamlessly between defense, control, and attack. Stop the chain's momentum, and you lost your defensive barrier. Masters never stopped moving. The chain became an extension of their breathing, their heartbeat, perpetual motion until the fight ended. But before we continue, I would like to ask you for something. If you like these documentaries and want to support me, please consider subscribing. It's free. Now, the kusarigama was devastating, but it required significant training to master. What if you needed something simpler? Something a soldier could learn quickly but that remained just as lethal? That's exactly what the next weapon delivered. Weapon 5, the Meteor Hammer, Liuxing Chue. Picture this, 2 weighted metal spheres, each the size of an orange, connected by a 10 to 15-foot rope or chain. Now imagine those spheres being spun so fast they become invisible blurs, generating enough momentum to shatter bones on impact. That's the Meteor Hammer. And unlike many of the weapons we've discussed, this one could be learned relatively quickly while remaining devastatingly effective. The genius of the Meteor Hammer lay in its physics. By spinning both weights in opposite directions, a wielder created what's essentially a kinetic trap. Any part of that spinning chain that made contact would wrap around its target. An arm, a leg, a weapon, even a neck. And once one weight connected, the second would whip around a split second later, striking from the opposite side with bone-crushing force. Chinese military records indicate that Meteor Hammer units were particularly effective against cavalry. Here's why. A horse charging at full speed represents enormous momentum. Block it with a sword, and you're likely to get trampled. But a Meteor Hammer wielder could release one of the weights directly into the horse's path. The animal couldn't stop in time, the weight would strike its legs or chest, and the chain would wrap around, either bringing the mount down instantly or causing enough pain and confusion to throw the rider. But the Meteor Hammer's true versatility showed in its range of techniques. At maximum extension, it became a long-range striking weapon. At mid-range, you could use it to entangle and control. At close quarters, you could choke the chain up and use the weights like brass knuckles or flails. One weapon, 3 completely different combat ranges. The psychological factor can't be overlooked either. That constant spinning motion was hypnotic, disorienting. Opponents would watch both weights, trying to track their patterns, and in that moment of split attention, they'd leave an opening. Master wielders would deliberately create predictable patterns, then break them suddenly. The weights would crash in from an unexpected angle while the opponent was still watching where they thought the attack would come from. Training emphasized flow and continuous motion. You never stopped the spin unless you were ending the fight. Letting the weights drop meant losing all your accumulated momentum and leaving yourself vulnerable. Masters could maintain the spin for hours, transitioning seamlessly from offense to defense, from one target to another, the weights whistling through the air in an endless, deadly circle. But as effective as the Meteor Hammer was in open combat, what about situations requiring stealth? What about weapons that needed to be concealed until the last possible moment? Our next weapon mastered that deadly surprise. Weapon 6, the Manrikigusari. The Manrikigusari looks innocent enough, just a length of chain, typically 2 to 4 feet long, with small weights at each end. You could carry it in your sleeve, wrap it around your wrist like a bracelet, or conceal it in dozens of other ways. And that's exactly what made it so deadly. This was the weapon of choice for feudal Japanese police and bodyguards, and for good reason. It was non-lethal when necessary, but could be instantly escalated to lethal force if the situation demanded it. In a society with strict rules about when and where weapons could be drawn, this flexibility was invaluable. Here's the tactical brilliance. Unlike a sword, which telegraphs your intentions the moment you reach for it, the Manrikigusari could be deployed instantly from complete concealment. 1 second, a samurai or criminal thinks they're facing an unarmed opponent. The next second, a weighted chain is wrapping around their sword hand, their throat, or their ankle. The techniques were devastating in their simplicity. Swing one weight at an opponent's wrist. Even if they block, the chain wraps around their arm and the second weight continues through to strike their face or neck. Throw it at their legs at just the right moment and they're on the ground before they realize what happened. Use it to bind an incoming sword strike, then close distance while their weapon is immobilized. But the real mastery came in knowing which technique to apply. A police officer subduing a drunk merchant would use different moves than a bodyguard defending against an assassin. The same weapon that could gently immobilize could also crush a windpipe or shatter a skull. It all depended on targeting and force application. Historical records describe master practitioners who could deploy the chain so quickly it was essentially invisible. Witnesses reported seeing guards seemingly wave their hands, and suddenly an attacker would drop, their weapon clattering away, with no clear understanding of what had struck them. The chain's length was critical. Too short, and you couldn't generate enough momentum or create effective entanglement. Too long, and it became unwieldy, difficult to control in confined spaces. The standard length of about 3 feet represented the perfect balance, long enough to be effective, short enough to be practical. Training emphasized speed of deployment above all else. Students would practice drawing and striking in a single motion, over and over, until it became instinctive. They'd drill blind, learning to gauge distance and timing by feel rather than sight, because in a real confrontation, you might not have time to look. But for all the sophistication of these Japanese and Chinese weapons, the Aztecs had their own horrifying take on chain weapons that took a completely different approach. Weapon 7. The Tepostapili with Tlacochtli attachment. Now, here's where we venture into territory that's less documented but no less fascinating. While the Aztecs are famous for their macuahuitl, the obsidian-edged sword, some warriors used a modified Tepostapili spear with an attached rope and hook system. The standard Tepostapili was already terrifying, a wooden spear with obsidian blades lining both sides of the point. But certain elite warriors, particularly those hunting opponents for sacrifice rather than outright slaughter, would attach a hooked blade to a length of rope, which they'd hurl at fleeing enemies. Think about the tactical context. You're an Aztec warrior, and your religious duty requires you to capture enemies alive for sacrifice. You can't just kill them outright. So you need a weapon that can incapacitate and control without necessarily being lethal, at least not immediately. The hook and rope system solved this problem brutally. Throw the hooked blade at a running enemy's leg or shoulder. Once it catches, you have them on a leash. Pull hard, and you drag them off balance. If they try to remove the hook, they're not running. If they keep running, the hook tears deeper with every step. The obsidian blades made this weapon particularly vicious. Obsidian can be sharper than modern surgical steel, sharp enough to cut at a molecular level. When a hooked obsidian blade caught in flesh, it didn't just puncture, it sliced cleanly through muscle tissue. And unlike metal, obsidian creates wounds that are extremely difficult to treat, with edges that continue cutting as the victim moves. But the real horror came in the combination. Miss with the hook? You've still got a spear with obsidian blades. Your enemy closes distance? Retract the hook and use it for close quarters combat while keeping the spear ready for thrusting. It was a weapon system that covered multiple combat scenarios. We know less about this particular weapon variation because Spanish conquistadors didn't document Aztec martial arts extensively. They were more concerned with describing how savage and barbaric these weapons seemed. But the few accounts that exist suggest these hook and rope systems were used primarily by jaguar and eagle warriors, the elite units whose fighting prowess was legendary. The psychological impact on enemies can't be understated. Imagine watching a fellow warrior get hooked like a fish and dragged backwards across the battlefield while still trying to fight. It wasn't just physically debilitating, it was humiliating, demoralizing. But while the Aztecs were perfecting these techniques in the Americas, on the other side of the world, Persian warriors were developing something equally ingenious. Weapon 8. The Panjanga. The Panjanga is one of the lesser-known weapons in this list, but it represents a fascinating evolution in Indian and Persian martial arts. Essentially, it's a set of 5 interconnected blades, sometimes swords, sometimes knives, linked by chains, creating a flexible, multi-bladed weapon that could be wielded like a segmented whip. Picture trying to fight someone wielding not one blade but 5, all moving independently yet all controlled by a single hand. Each segment could bend and flex around defenses, striking from multiple angles simultaneously. The tactical advantage was overwhelming against single-blade opponents. They'd block what they thought was the main attack, only to have a second or third blade curve around their defense and strike from an unexpected vector. The chained segments meant the weapon could quite literally wrap around shields, leaving the defender exposed. But here's what made the Panj Anga truly devastating: unpredictability. With a sword, your opponent can predict the arc of your swing based on your body mechanics. With the Panj Anga, each segment followed its own physics, influenced by the momentum of the segments before and after it. Masters could initiate a strike at one angle and have the terminal blade end up attacking from a completely different direction. Training with this weapon bordered on torture. Because the blades were interconnected, any mistake in momentum or timing would cause them to tangle or, worse, rebound and strike the wielder. Students began with wooden segments, and even then, injuries were common. It took years to develop the body mechanics and spatial awareness necessary to wield the weapon effectively. In actual combat, Panj Anga wielders would use sweeping, circular motions, creating a moving barrier of steel that enemies couldn't penetrate. The longer reach, sometimes extending 10 to 12 feet at full extension, meant they could control space that would require multiple swordsmen to defend. Historical accounts from Mughal-era India describe royal bodyguards using the Panj Anga specifically for crowd control. One guard with this weapon could hold a doorway or narrow street against multiple attackers, the segmented blades creating overlapping defensive zones that forced opponents back. But the weapon had limitations. It was exhausting to wield. Maintaining that constant motion while ensuring the segments didn't tangle required enormous physical conditioning. It was also less effective in confined spaces where there wasn't room for the full sweeping motions. And against ranged weapons like bows, it offered no particular advantage. Yet for the specific situations it was designed for, protecting VIPs in crowded spaces, holding choke points, or fighting multiple opponents in open areas, few weapons could match its effectiveness. Which brings us to our final weapon, and perhaps the most sophisticated chain weapon ever created. Weapon 9. The Flying Guillotine, Zhueli Hua. Of all the weapons on this list, the Flying Guillotine holds a special place, because historians genuinely aren't sure if it ever existed as anything more than a legend. But the legend itself is so specific, so detailed, that it deserves examination. According to Chinese historical texts and martial arts traditions, the Flying Guillotine was an assassination weapon consisting of a bladed, collapsible cage attached to a long chain. The assassin would throw this device over a target's head, pull a cord that would close the blades inward, and then yank the chain, decapitating the victim from a distance. The descriptions are remarkably consistent across sources. A circular blade mechanism, internal spikes to help secure it on the target's head, a collapsible design that allowed it to be carried inconspicuously, and a chain long enough to operate from 15 to 20 feet away. Some accounts describe a semicircular blade that could close like scissors. Others describe a circular blade with internal spikes that would pierce the neck before severing it. If this weapon existed, and that's a significant if, it would have been the ultimate assassination tool. Silent, fast, effective from beyond sword range, and leaving the assassin far enough away to escape in the chaos that would follow a public beheading. The training for such a weapon would have been incredibly specialized. You'd need perfect accuracy to throw the device over someone's head from a distance. You'd need perfect timing to activate the blade closure at exactly the right moment. Too early, and it closes before reaching the target. Too late, and they have time to react. And you'd need the physical strength to actually sever a neck with a single pull, which, biomechanically speaking, requires enormous force. Some historians believe the Flying Guillotine was actually a propaganda tool, a weapon attributed to the Qing dynasty's secret police to create fear among political dissidents. The message being, even in a crowded marketplace, surrounded by people, you could be assassinated without warning, without your killer ever coming within sword's reach. Others point to specific martial arts schools that claim to preserve flying guillotine techniques, suggesting it was a real weapon that simply fell out of use as more practical implements emerged. The truth? We may never know for certain. But the legend of the Flying Guillotine has persisted for centuries, appearing in martial arts films, novels, and historical texts. And whether it was real or imagined, it represents the ultimate evolution of chain weapon thinking. Complete control and execution from a safe distance, requiring absolute mastery to deploy. From the precision of the Kaioketsu Shoge to the legendary flying guillotine, these 9 weapons represent humanity's endless innovation in the art of war. Each one required years to master. Each one changed the battlefield in ways that traditional weapons couldn't match. If you enjoyed this deep dive into forgotten weapons, hit that subscribe button. There's so much more history to uncover.